Cool Runnings is not only considered a classic example of a tried and true Disney movie with all the trimmings, and not to mention the kind the company has been severely lacking in recent years, but is also pretty much the go-to example for the underdog and beating the odds to success inspirational story out there. And because of that, many look on the movie as a bit cliche, if nonetheless still a good example of such a story template done right. But what most people today don't realize is Cool Runnings was actually considered cliche all the way back when it was released in 1993, and yet, just like the Jamaican bobsled team themselves, it managed to beat the odds and become a success anyway. And today, I'd like to go over what exactly it is that makes Cool Runnings such an iconic film, despite not exactly telling the most original story. And needless to say, there will be spoilers for this movie ahead. So in case you haven't seen it yet and don't want to know what happens, you probably shouldn't proceed with this video. This will be the only spoiler warning I'll be giving out. Okay, so to point out the obvious first, one of the biggest reasons for the lasting appeal of Cool Runnings is that, contrary to what some might think, a movie being cliche doesn't automatically make it bad. Most of the time, cliches become cliches for a reason, and it's usually because they have mass appeal and is something the audience likes to see. So in most cases, it more depends on how those cliches are used that determines how well written a story is. Because as a writer myself, I can safely say that you have to understand cliches and why they're well liked if they're going to actually work in a story. Because if one just inserts them in without any attempt to understand why audiences love them, it'll never work. Trust me, as a man who's written books, I speak from experience when I say that one of the biggest reasons stories tend to fail is due to writers not understanding certain facets of storytelling and how and when they should be used. But the thing is, Cool Runnings perfectly understands every cliche it uses, and moreover uses those very cliches to enhance the story, rather than take away from it like most writers end up doing. I mean, sure, nobody can accuse the screenplay of exactly being original, but it's how it tells that story that makes it the well-known film it is today. Because, and perhaps most importantly, it may be a story about four Jamaicans who've never even seen snow trying to compete in an Olympic bobsledding event, but its core themes are ones that anybody can relate to. Specifically, the need to prove yourself and go the distance no matter what it takes, and that with enough work and dedication, you can still do all of that even if you don't actually win. To put it another way, and going back to what I was just saying, this movie may borrow a lot of elements from Rocky, for example, but what makes it work is that it actually understands what makes Rocky such an iconic film and why people love it, and applies that understanding to the screenplay rather than just blindly ripping it off and feeling completely hollow. And this also applies to pretty much everything else in the movie that can be considered a cliche as well. The disgraced coach trying to redeem himself, Junior having to stand up to his father about what he wants to do with his life, the Jamaicans having to go above and beyond to learn how to bobsled because they're so unaccustomed to snow. All of these things are story elements that have been used in hundreds of films before and since. But it's the fact that the movie is able to incorporate them into the story naturally that allows it to stand head and shoulders above most of those other movies that use them. Though, sure, Cool Runnings obviously isn't a masterpiece that can be considered one of the best movies ever made, but it's not trying to be. Instead, it's simply trying to tell the inspirational story of a Jamaican team that beat the odds to get the glory and respect they deserved. And once again, it tells that intended story really well. Much better than it had any right to, as a matter of fact. But what also helps the movie along is how everybody involved treats it. Because simply put, the actors, the writers, the crew, nobody acts like it's a burden or something that's beneath them. Everybody not only treats the movie as something worth being a part of, but also tells the story with complete sincerity. And this is perhaps most evident in the lead actors' performances. Because John Candy, for instance, was one of the biggest comedians in the world at that point in his life. He could have easily just phoned the whole thing in for a paycheck, but he doesn't do that. Instead, he plays the part the way it should be played, and in the process proves he was a much more capable actor than he was sometimes given credit for. Because he's not playing a slob that's constantly spouting one-liners this time around. He's playing a depressed man trying to come to grips with his past, and through the encouragement of an admirer, is able to not only find something to care about again, but redeem himself of his obsessive need to win by helping them beat the odds no matter what anybody says. And once again, that may be a story that's been told before, but Candy's performance, combined with the way it's written and the complete sincerity of the script, all make it something that might just bring a tear to your eye anyway. And the same goes just as much for Just Leon, and forgive me if I'm not pronouncing that right. Because Darius is a natural-born athlete determined to prove his worth in the Olympics. And when he finds that the only way he can do that is in the Winter Olympics, that's exactly what he does. And he's not going to let any amount of doubters, mocking, or impossible odds stop him from achieving his dreams. To put it simply, this man is an inspiration, the person that everybody wishes they could be, because he not only knows exactly what he wants in life, but doesn't let fear keep him from going after it, no matter what's stacked against him. And again, it's the fact that the movie portrays this without an ounce of irony, as well as Leon's completely sincere and dedicated performance, that allows it all to have so much dramatic weight. And even the other bobsledders prove just as capable in this department, with Raul D. Lewis perfectly portraying the conflicted junior, who ultimately finds the courage to do what's right, as well as Malik Yoba as the temperamental Yul Brenner, who after a while finally learns to let go of his anger and help the man who accidentally screwed him up. And as I keep saying, it's the fact that the movie plays all of this completely straight and doesn't try to subvert any of it that makes it all work so well. And let's face it, Sanka's just hilarious, plain and simple. Now, I know some might try to cite another reason that the movie works despite its cliché nature is because it was based on a true story, and that the audience is apt to be more forgiving of them because of that. and that is true to an extent. I even dedicated a whole video to this very topic, which you can find a link in the description to. But the thing is, the only thing Cool Runnings takes from real life is the general concept of a group of Jamaicans entering the Winter Olympics as a bobsledding team and doing better than anybody expected them to. But other than that premise, and one or two of the more major events depicted, everything else is fictionalized. Even the characters were completely made up for the movie, having very little in common with their real-life counterparts. So the point is that while the movie may be inspired by real-life events, most of the story was still made up by the screenwriters. So everything I've been saying here still most definitely applies, if not even more so. Because the writers made it cliché in order to make the story better. Since, as I noted at the beginning, clichés are overused for a reason. And the fact that it's still considered one of the better underdog movies out there only proves that. Because, as I said before, I've written books. I know what I'm talking about when I say that one of the biggest things writers often overlook is that sometimes it's not the story itself, but how well that story is told that determines how good it is. Because simply put, you can have the most original concept ever, but if it's badly executed, it will inevitably not work. While an extremely cliché story can actually be really good if done the right way. When you really strip most stories down, a lot of them are the same. It's what is added to it, what the writers individually contribute, how well they tell that story, and what those contributions are that determine if it's good or not. And once again, that's exactly what happened in Cool Runnings. The story and characters are done so well that when the team carries the sled over the finish line, you already know, without him even having to say it, that he's enough without the gold medal. That unlike his coach, he doesn't need to win, but simply prove his worth to feel satisfied with everything he's done. And honestly, that's an even more rewarding ending than if they had won, because it reinforces the fact that you don't always have to win to feel fulfilled. And sure enough, the team gets all the praise and respect they deserve anyway, because they gave it their all and lost with dignity. And as I've already stressed a few times, the reason that moment is so powerful is because everything up until that point was written and performed exactly the way it needed to be. It doesn't matter if it's cliché, because it still manages to make the audience feel the full impact of the ending regardless of that. And ultimately, that's what a movie is supposed to do. So, as I said before, Cool Runnings definitely can't be accused of telling the most original story ever. I'm pretty sure everybody can agree on that. But, as I just spent the whole video emphasizing, it didn't need to be original to tell a very satisfying story, because it ultimately knew and understood how to use the various clichés it employs to make the audience feel exactly what it wants them to. Because once again, it may be a somewhat typical underdog story, but by doing it so well, shows exactly why people love underdog stories so much. As I've already said many times, it's about how clichés are used, and not that it's cliché in the first place that determines if a story is good or not. And that's what more writers got to keep in mind these days. Because simply put, if more writers were just focused on actually telling good stories, even if they're a bit cliché in nature, then trying to come up with the most original concept ever, then maybe movies would be in a better place overall. I honestly think we could use a bit more cliches in our stories these days. Because as Cool Runnings proves, it may not exactly be an original film, but it's still a very fulfilling one to watch. And that's ultimately what's more important anyway. Okay, I think I've gone on about this for long enough. So now I'd like to hear from all of you. Do you believe that Cool Runnings works so well as an inspirational movie because it knew how to use the cliches it employs and understood the mass appeal of them? Or do you believe it's too generic and could have stood to be a bit more original? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And please remember that you don't have to agree with any opinions gone over in this video if you don't want to. You can feel about Cool Runnings and the way it's written however you'd like. And if you think that everything I said was completely wrong, that is totally okay. And thank you all for watching. I very greatly appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next time.